The cold Seattle rain hit the black umbrella like tiny bullets. Gu Yeonseok did not care about the weather, but he hated the smell of the city at midnight. It smelled like wet garbage and cheap weed. He held the umbrella over Victoria, his fiancée. She was wearing a red silk dress that cost more than most people made in a year. She was laughing at a stupid joke one of the city politicians made inside the fancy restaurant they had just left. Yeonseok didn't laugh. He just wanted to get in the damn car. His men were waiting by the black SUV parked at the curb. The heavy engine was running, exhaust smoke mixed with the freezing fog. "Yeonseok, honey, you're getting my shoulder wet," Victoria whined. She pulled her white fur coat tighter around her skinny arms and pouted. "Move closer to the middle then," he said. His voice was flat. Dead, he didn't love her. She was a business deal. Her father owned the massive shipping docks on the coast, and Yeonseok needed those docks to move his illegal guns and dirty cash. That was the only reason she had a diamond the size of a grape sitting on her finger. He reached out and opened the heavy door of the SUV for her. But before she could step inside, something caught his eye across the wet street. Under the flickering orange light of a broken street lamp, someone was working. It was a woman. She was kneeling on the hard, wet concrete of the crosswalk. She held a cheap scrub brush, digging hard into the side of a concrete barrier to remove some bright red graffiti. The city paid desperate people pennies to clean this shit up at night. Her jacket was way too thin for the winter rain. It stuck to her back, completely soaked. But it wasn't the jacket that made Yeonseok stop breathing. It was the way she moved. The sharp, jerky way she scrubbed like she was fighting the wall. He knew those shoulders. He knew the shape of her neck. The woman stopped brushing. She pushed a wet piece of dark hair out of her face and turned her head to look down the empty street. Yeonseok's heart slammed against his ribs. It hit so hard it actually hurt his chest. "Zuri." It was her. The woman who smiled in his bed 3 years ago and then called the cops to burn his smuggling ring to the ground. The bitch who cost him his best men, millions of dollars, and 2 years hiding like a rat in Mexico. He had dreamed of choking her. He had dreamed of watching her bleed. Then his dark eyes shifted. Just 10 feet away from her, pushed up against the brick wall of a closed pawn shop, was a large, wet cardboard box. An old blue plastic tarp covered half of it. Inside the box, he saw movement. 2 little heads, twins, sleeping in the freezing rain while their mother scrubbed the street. Yeonseok dropped the umbrella. It hit the wet sidewalk with a loud smack. Victoria screamed as the cold rain hit her expensive hair. He didn't look at her. He started walking across the street. Before we find out what Yeonseok does to the woman who ruined his life, please leave a like on this video. Liking the video tells the algorithm to push more dark, gritty romance stories just like this one straight to your feed. Also, let me know down in the comments, what city or country are you watching Afro-Korean Love FM from today? And listen to me very carefully. If you don't hit that subscribe button right now, you might leave Zuri and her innocent twins to freeze to death in this dark Seattle alley while a ruthless mob boss tears them apart. Don't be the reason those babies lose their mother tonight. Subscribe now to save them. A car honked loudly as Yeonseok walked right into the middle of the road. He didn't speed up. He didn't look at the driver. He just stared at Zuri. The driver rolled down his window to yell, but one look at Yeonseok's cold, dead eyes and the expensive black suit made the driver shut his mouth and speed away. Yeonseok's boots splashed in the deep puddles. The rain was soaking through his suit clothes, chilling his skin, but his blood felt like it was on fire. Zuri didn't see him coming. She was rubbing her hands together, blowing warm breath onto her freezing, bare fingers. Her knuckles were cracked and bleeding. The cheap soap from her bucket mixed with the blood and the rain, making pink puddles around her worn-out sneakers. "Scrub harder," a deep, rough voice said from right behind her. Zuri froze, her whole body locked up tight. The scrub brush slipped from her numb fingers and clattered onto the concrete. She knew that voice. She had heard it in her nightmares every single night for the last 3 years. Slowly, she turned around, still on her knees in the dirty water. Yeonseok stood towering over her. The street lamp cast deep, dark shadows over his sharp cheekbones and cold eyes. He looked like the devil standing in the rain. "Yeonseok," she whispered. Her voice was weak, shaking so bad she could barely get the name out. "You look like shit, Zuri," he said. His voice was perfectly calm, which made it 10 times more scary. He looked her up and down with disgust. I spent 3 years imagining how I would find you. I thought you'd be living in a big fancy house with the reward money you got for selling me out to the feds. But look at you. You're scrubbing piss and paint off the street in the middle of the night. Zuri swallowed hard. She looked panicked. Her dark eyes darted past his legs, looking straight toward the cardboard box under the awning. Yeonseok caught the look. He slowly turned his head to look at the box, then looked back down at her. Don't, she begged, her voice cracking. Please, Yeonseok, do whatever you want to me, but please don't look at them. They have nothing to do with this. He took a step closer to her. His expensive leather boot almost crushed her bleeding fingers. You don't get to tell me what to do anymore. You lost that right when you wore a wire in my house. I had to, Zuri cried out, but she kept her voice low so she wouldn't wake the kids. Hot tears mixed with the cold rain on her dark brown skin. You were going to kill those innocent people at the docks. I couldn't let you do it. I loved you, but you were completely out of control. Love, Yeonseok laughed. It was a dark, ugly sound that had no joy in it. You don't know shit about love. Love is loyalty. You gave me up to the cops. He suddenly reached down and grabbed a thick fistful of her wet jacket. He hauled her to her feet in one violent pull. Zuri gasped, her hands flying up to grip his wrists. He slammed her back against the wet concrete barrier. The air rushed out of her lungs in a painful rush. Fuck, he muttered, pulling her face inches from his. He could smell the harsh soap on her skin, but underneath it, she still smelled like vanilla. The scent messed with his head. He wanted to snap her neck. He wanted to drag his teeth across her jaw. The conflict inside him made him crazy. Boss, a voice called out from the street. It was T, Yeonseok's right-hand man. T was holding an umbrella, looking nervously at Victoria, who was still standing by the SUV screaming something they couldn't hear over the storm. Boss, the cops patrol this street in 10 minutes. We need to go. Victoria is throwing a fit. Yeonseok didn't look away from Zuri's terrified eyes. Tell Victoria to get a damn taxi, he yelled back to T. She's not riding with us. Zuri's eyes went wide. She started struggling, pushing her hands against his hard chest. No, let me go. I have to finish this job. If I don't finish, we don't eat tomorrow. Let me go. You really think I'm letting you walk away? He sneered. After what you did, you belong to me, Zuri. Your life is mine to end whenever I feel like it. Mama. A tiny, sleepy voice cut through the sound of the pouring rain. Yeonseok froze. He kept Zuri pinned against the concrete, but he turned his head slowly. One of the twins had crawled out from under the blue tarp. A little boy, maybe 2.5 years old. He was wearing a faded, oversized sweater that had holes in the sleeves. He rubbed his eyes with tiny fists, looking around in the dark. Beside him, a little girl with curly hair was still asleep, shivering in the damp cardboard box. Yeonseok felt a cold drop in his stomach. He looked closely at the boy. The kid had Zuri's dark skin and beautiful curly hair, but the shape of his eyes, the sharp jawline even on a baby face. It was his face. He was looking at his own face. 3 years. Zuri had been gone for exactly 3 years. Yeonseok slowly let go of Zuri's jacket. He backed up a step. His chest moved up and down fast. How old are they? He asked. His voice was a dangerous, low whisper. Zuri scrambled in front of him, blocking his view of the box. She held her bleeding hands out like a shield to protect her babies. They aren't yours. They aren't. Don't touch them. I said, how old are they? He roared. The sound echoed down the empty street. Zuri flinched, sobbing quietly. 2, she cried, covering her face. They just turned 2. Yeonseok stared at her. The math was simple. She was pregnant when she betrayed him. She was pregnant when she ran away. She hid his children in a cardboard box in the freezing rain while he was busy buying diamond rings for rich women he didn't even like. The anger that hit him wasn't just hot. It was blinding. It made his vision go completely red. He lunged forward. He didn't hit her, but he grabbed her arm so hard his fingers dug deep into her muscles. She screamed, but he pulled her hard against his chest, wrapping his other arm tight around her waist so she couldn't move. She kicked and scratched at his suit, crying out for her babies. T, Yeonseok barked over Zuri's loud screams. T ran across the street, his gun already half pulled out of his jacket just in case. Yes, boss. Get the kids, Yeonseok ordered, his eyes locked on Zuri's crying face. Wrap them in my dry coat. Put them in the back of the SUV. If they get one drop of rain on their heads, I'll shoot you myself. No, no, please, leave them alone, don't take my babies. Zuri fought like a wild animal. She managed to free one hand and slapped him hard across the face. The smack was loud. T stopped dead in his tracks, waiting for Yeonseok to pull his gun and shoot her. Nobody hit the boss. Nobody. Yeonseok slowly turned his head back. His jaw ticked. He tasted a little bit of warm blood inside his cheek. He looked down at Zuri, who was shaking, her chest heaving, terrified of what she just did. He leaned down until his lips were right next to her ear. You hit me again, and I'll tie you to the back of the car. You want to save your kids? You get in the damn car and shut your mouth. You're coming home. Without waiting for her answer, he threw her over his broad shoulder like a sack of dirt. Zuri sobbed loudly, beating her fists against his back, but she didn't try to jump off. She watched in horror as T gently scooped up the two sleepy toddlers from the wet cardboard box. Yeonseok walked back across the street. Victoria was standing on the curb, her face red with extreme anger. What the hell is going on? Victoria screamed, pointing a fake fingernail at Zuri. Who is that trash? Put her down right now. Yeonseok walked past Victoria without even looking at her. He opened the back door of the SUV and tossed Zuri inside onto the expensive leather seats. She scrambled back, pulling her knees to her chest, shaking with cold and fear. T hurried over and placed the two toddlers in her lap. Zuri wrapped her arms around them, crying into their soft hair. Yeonseok, are you listening to me? Victoria yelled, grabbing his arm. He turned slowly and slapped her hand away. We're done, Victoria. Go tell your daddy the deal is off. And if he has a problem with it, tell him to come see me. Before she could say another word, Yeonseok slammed the heavy car door shut, trapping Zuri and the twins inside the dark car with him. He knocked on the glass partition. The driver slammed his foot on the gas. The black SUV sped away into the rainy night, leaving the rich heiress standing alone on the sidewalk in the pouring rain. Inside the car, the heater blasted warm air. Zuri held her babies tight, staring at the dark window. She had run so far and fought so hard, but she was right back where she started, trapped with the devil. The inside of the SUV was too quiet. The only sound was the heavy rain hitting the roof and the soft hum of the heater blowing warm air. Zuri pulled the twins closer to her chest. She rubbed their backs, trying to get them to stop shivering. Her own wet clothes were soaking into the expensive leather seats, leaving a large, dark puddle around her. Yeonseok sat opposite them. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just watched them with eyes as black as the night outside. He stared at the little boy. The kid stared right back. The boy had Yeonseok's dark, heavy eyebrows and the exact same sharp shape of his eyes. It made Yeonseok's stomach twist into a tight, angry knot. 3 years. 3 years of missing out. 3 years of this woman hiding his blood in a wet cardboard box while she washed dirty streets for loose change. What are their names? Yeonseok asked. His voice cut through the quiet car like a sharp knife. Zuri swallowed hard. She looked away, staring out the dark window at the passing streetlights. It doesn't matter, she whispered. Yeonseok moved so fast Zuri didn't even have time to blink. He leaned across the small space between the seats and grabbed her chin with his large hand. He forced her to look at him. His strong fingers pressed hard into her jaw. I will not ask you again, he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low growl. What are my children's names? Zuri let out a shaky breath. Hot tears filled her eyes and spilled over his fingers. Leo, she choked out, and Mia. He let go of her face and slowly sat back against his seat. He looked at the little girl sleeping against Zuri's chest. Mia. She looked so small, wrapped in the dirty, wet sweater with holes in the sleeves. She looked like she had not eaten a full, warm meal in days. You made them live like stray dogs, Yeonseok said, pure disgust dripping from every single word. You stole them from me, and you put them in a box on the freezing street. You are a terrible mother. I kept them safe, Zuri yelled back, her voice breaking. She didn't care that T was driving in the front or that there was a glass window between them. She was fighting for her life. Safe from you. Safe from the guns and the dirty money and the men who want to put a bullet in your head. I didn't want my babies growing up thinking it is normal to hurt people for a living. So you made them freeze instead, Yeonseok shot back, leaning forward again. You made them beg. You really think this is better? Look at them, Zuri. They are wearing actual garbage. Zuri looked down at her kids. She started to cry loud, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. She hated that he was right. She hated that she couldn't give them a warm bed and a full stomach, but she hated him more. I worked 3 jobs, she cried, hugging the kids tighter. I did everything I could. The cops promised me witness protection, but they lied to me. They left me with nothing. I had to run to keep us alive. You should have come to me, he said coldly. You would have killed me, she screamed. I still might, he answered, his face completely blank. The SUV slowed down. It turned off the smooth highway and onto a long, bumpy gravel road. Tall, thick pine trees surrounded them on both sides, blocking out the city lights. This was Mercer Island, Yeonseok's hidden safe house. It was deep in the woods, far away from any neighbors who might hear a woman scream. The heavy iron gates swung open as T flashed the headlights. They pulled up to a massive, dark gray stone house. It looked like a prison. There were no lights on the outside, just a few dim bulbs near the heavy front door. The car stopped. T quickly got out and opened Yeonseok's door, holding a large black umbrella over his boss. Yeonseok stepped out into the freezing rain. He looked back inside the car at Zuri. Get out, he ordered. Zuri shook her head. She hugged Leo and Mia so tight they started to fuss and cry. No, please, just let us go. I won't tell anyone I saw you. I swear to God, Yeonseok, we will leave Seattle tonight. You will never see us again. Get the fuck out of the car, Zuri, he said, his patience completely gone. Before I drag you out by your hair. She knew he wasn't lying. She carefully slid out of the seat, holding the twins in her arms. They were heavy, and her arms were weak from scrubbing the streets all night. Her worn-out sneakers hit the wet gravel. She almost tripped, but she caught her balance just in time. T closed the car door with a loud thud. He stood right behind her, blocking her only way out. Walk, Yeonseok said, pointing to the large oak front door. Zuri walked slowly. The rain hit her face, mixing with her tears. She carried her babies up the wide stone steps. Yeonseok unlocked the door and pushed it open. He stood to the side, waiting for her to go inside. The inside of the house was freezing. It smelled like dust and expensive wood. Yeonseok flicked a switch on the wall, and bright, harsh lights turned on in the massive hallway. The sudden, bright light made little Leo start crying louder. His loud wails echoed off the high ceiling. Mia woke up fully and started crying too, terrified by the strange place and the scary, angry men. Make them stop, Yeonseok said, rubbing his forehead like he already had a headache. They are scared, Zuri yelled at him, bouncing the kids to try and calm them down. They are babies, they don't know you, and this place is terrifying. Take them to the guest room upstairs, he told her, ignoring her anger. First door on the right, there is a bathroom connected to it. Wash them, wash yourself. You smell like the damn street. T will bring you some clean clothes from the storage. And then what? Zuri asked, staring at him with wide, panicked eyes. What are you going to do to us? Yeonseok took off his wet suit jacket and threw it on a nearby chair. He rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt. His forearms were covered in dark, heavy tattoos. Right now, I am going to pour myself a very large drink, he said slowly. And then I am going to come upstairs, and you are going to tell me exactly how you managed to hide from me for 3 years. Go. He pointed up the long, winding staircase. Zuri didn't argue. She turned around and started climbing the stairs as fast as she could with 2 crying toddlers in her arms. Her legs burned, but she didn't stop until she reached the top. She found the first door on the right and pushed it open. It was a huge bedroom. A massive bed sat in the middle, covered in clean white sheets. There was a thick rug on the floor and a large window looking out into the dark woods. Zuri hurried inside and kicked the door shut. She reached up and locked it, even though she knew a tiny piece of metal wouldn't stop Yeonseok if he wanted to come in. She set Leo and Mia down on the big bed. They were still crying, their little faces red and wet. SHH, SHH, it's okay, Zuri whispered, kissing their foreheads. Mama is here, it's okay. Look at this big bed, we are safe for now. She ran to the connected bathroom. It was bigger than the entire apartment she used to rent. The floor was made of warm, heated tiles. She quickly turned on the hot water in the huge glass shower, letting the steam fill the room. She needed to get the freezing street water off her babies before they got sick. Back in the bedroom, there was a heavy knock on the door. Zuri jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. I have clothes, T's rough voice called out from the hallway. Open the door. Zuri hesitated. She looked at her kids, then slowly walked to the door. She unlocked it and pulled it open just an inch. T pushed a stack of folded clothes through the gap. It looked like some oversized t-shirts and soft sweatpants. The boss says you have 20 minutes, T said softly. He didn't look angry like Yeonseok, he just looked tired. Don't do anything stupid, Zuri. The property is surrounded by guards. There are dogs in the woods. You can't run. I know, she whispered, taking the clothes. T nodded and walked away. Zuri locked the door again. She stripped off her soaking wet jacket and her cheap jeans. She was shivering uncontrollably. She undressed the twins, throwing their dirty, ragged clothes into a pile on the floor. She carried them both into the warm bathroom. The hot water felt like magic against her freezing skin. The soap smelled like expensive wood and spice, just like Yeonseok. She scrubbed the dirt and the street grime off her baby's skin. She let the hot water wash over her own cut and bleeding hands. The pain stung, but the warmth helped. For a few minutes, standing in the steam, holding her clean children, Zuri felt a tiny bit of relief. But it didn't last. The reality of where she was crashed down on her chest like a heavy rock. She was in the devil's house. He had found her. All her running, all her starving and hiding, it was all for nothing. She dressed the twins in the clean, oversized t-shirts T brought. The shirts swallowed their tiny bodies, reaching all the way down to their ankles like little dresses. Zuri put on a pair of gray sweatpants and a large black t-shirt. It smelled faintly of Yeonseok's cologne. She hated it, but it was dry. She tucked Leo and Mia into the massive bed, pulling the thick white blankets up to their chins. They were so exhausted from crying and the stress that they fell asleep almost instantly. Their little chests moved up and down in a slow, steady rhythm. Zuri sat on the edge of the bed, watching them. She chewed on her bottom lip until she tasted blood. She needed a plan. She needed to find a way out. But T was right. Guards, dogs, miles of dark woods. She was trapped. Downstairs, a door slammed. Heavy footsteps echoed through the silent house. They were walking up the stairs. Slow, deliberate. Each step sounded like a judge hitting his hammer. Zuri stood up from the bed. She placed herself directly between the door and her sleeping children. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to stand tall. The handle turned. Zuri had locked it, but she heard the click of a key from the outside. Yeonseok didn't ask for permission. He opened the door and walked inside. He had changed out of his wet suit. He was wearing dark sweatpants and a tight black t-shirt that clung to his broad chest and the thick muscles of his arms. He held a glass of dark brown liquor in one hand. He looked around the room, his eyes scanning the pile of wet, dirty clothes on the floor, the steam rolling out of the bathroom, and finally settling on Zuri. He closed the door behind him and locked it. The sound made Zuri's stomach drop. Sit down, he ordered, pointing his glass at a small chair in the corner of the room. I'll stand, she said. Her voice shook, but she tried to sound brave. Yeonseok took a slow sip of his drink. His eyes were cold, calculating. 3 years ago, he started, his voice completely flat. You came to my bed, you kissed me, you told me you loved me. And the next morning, 50 federal agents kicked my door down. They raided my docks. They took $6 million in cash and weapons. They put my brother in federal prison for the rest of his life. Zuri swallowed the lump in her throat. He killed an innocent man, Yeonseok. You all did. You were going to keep doing it. I had to stop it. You were my woman, he snapped, his voice suddenly rising. The sudden anger made Zuri flinch. You don't get to play hero. You belong to me. Your loyalty was supposed to be to me, but you sold me out for a pat on the back from the cops. And then you ran away with my children. He took 3 long steps toward her. Zuri backed up until her legs hit the edge of the bed. She couldn't go any further without waking the twins. Yeonseok stopped right in front of her. He was so close she could feel the heat coming off his body. She could smell the strong liquor on his breath. He looked down at her, his eyes full of violent, angry promises. Tell me why I shouldn't throw you to my men right now, he whispered softly. Tell me why I shouldn't let them have their revenge on the rat who ruined our business. Tell me why I shouldn't lock you in a basement and raise these kids by myself. Zuri looked up into his dark eyes. She saw the monster she had run from. but deep down, buried under the anger and the pride, she saw something else. He was hurting. The betrayal had ripped him apart. "Because they need their mother," Zuri whispered back, her voice breaking. "And because if you kill me, you will have to look at their faces every single day for the rest of your life, knowing you murdered the person who kept them alive while you were gone." Yeonseok stared at her. His jaw clenched so tight the muscles popped against his skin. He slowly reached out and wrapped his large, warm hand around her throat. He didn't squeeze hard enough to cut off her air, but the grip was firm. A clear warning. "You think you hold the power here because you gave birth to them," he said softly, his thumb tracing the wild pulse beating in her neck. "You think these kids are a shield. You are wrong, Zuri. They are the only reason you are standing in a warm bedroom right now instead of bleeding out in an alley." Zuri's breath hitched. She kept her hands down at her sides. If she fought him, he would only get angrier. She just looked at him, letting a single tear fall down her cheek. It landed on his thumb. He stared at the tear like it burned him. He suddenly let go of her neck and took a step back, running a hand through his dark hair. He looked frustrated, angry at himself for not hurting her. "You are going to stay in this room," he commanded, turning his back to her. "You are not going to leave without my permission. If you try to run again, I will not bring you back. I will only bring the kids back. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she answered quickly. Her voice was barely a squeak. "Good," he said. He walked over to the door and grabbed the handle. He stopped and looked over his shoulder at the bed, where Leo and Mia were sleeping peacefully. For a split second, the cold, hard mask on his face cracked. He looked like a man who had just found a massive treasure he didn't know existed. Then the mask snapped back into place. He looked back at Zuri. "Sleep while you can, Zuri," he warned her. "Because tomorrow, we are going to have a very long talk about the future." He opened the door, stepped out into the hallway, and slammed it shut. Zuri heard the key turn in the lock again. She was trapped. She slowly sank down to the floor, pulling her knees to her chest, and finally let herself cry in the dark. The floor was covered in a thick, expensive carpet, but it still felt hard against Zuri's aching bones. She did not sleep. She sat with her back pressed against the heavy wooden door all night. Her knees were pulled tight to her chest. Every time the wind howled outside or a floorboard creaked somewhere in the massive house, she jumped. Her cut hands throbbed with a dull, hot pain. The huge t-shirt she wore swallowed her small frame, and she wrapped her arms around herself to stop the shaking. She watched the bed. Leo and Mia were dead to the world. They were sprawled out in the middle of the soft, white sheets. For the first time in their short lives, they were not shivering. They were not sleeping on damp cardboard or wrapped in dirty blankets. They looked peaceful. It broke Zuri's heart. She had fought so hard to keep them away from this dark, violent world, and now they were sleeping in the bed of a mob boss. Hours passed slowly. The black sky outside the window slowly turned to a muddy, ugly gray. The heavy rain finally stopped, leaving behind a thick fog that hugged the dark pine trees around the property. Zuri pushed herself up from the floor. Her legs felt like lead. Her back popped loudly as she stood. She walked over to the large window and looked down. 3 stories below, the backyard was huge and surrounded by a high stone wall. Near the tree line, she saw 2 men in dark raincoats holding thick leather leashes. At the end of the leashes were massive, angry-looking guard dogs. The dogs were pacing back and forth, sniffing the wet ground. T was right. There was no way out. If she tried to run with 2 toddlers, the dogs would tear them apart before they even reached the wall. "Mama." Zuri spun around quickly. Leo was sitting up in the middle of the huge bed. He rubbed his sleepy eyes with tiny fists. His dark curls were a messy halo around his head. He looked around the giant room, totally confused. "Where are we?" he asked. His little voice was raspy from sleep. Zuri rushed over to the edge of the bed. She climbed up and pulled him into her lap, kissing the top of his head. "It's okay, baby. We are visiting a friend." Mia stirred beside them. She sat up, clutching a white pillow. Her big brown eyes went wide as she looked at the giant flat-screen TV on the wall and the shiny bathroom door. "Hungry," she mumbled, pointing to her stomach. "I know, sweetie," Zuri whispered, feeling a sharp pain of guilt in her chest. She hadn't fed them a real meal since yesterday morning. She had spent their last $5 on a loaf of bread and some cheap peanut butter, and they had eaten that for lunch. Before she could figure out what to do, The sound of a key turning in the lock echoed in the quiet room. Zuri stiffened. She pulled both kids tightly against her chest, her heart suddenly beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. She watched the door handle turn slowly. It was T. He pushed the door open with his foot because his hands were full. He carried a massive silver tray. The smell of the food hit the room instantly, and Zuri's stomach let out a loud, embarrassing growl. There was a mountain of fluffy pancakes covered in butter and dark syrup. There was a huge plate of crispy bacon, scrambled eggs, and a bowl of fresh, bright red strawberries. T didn't look at her. He walked over to a small round table near the window and set the heavy tray down. He pulled out 2 chairs. "The boss says they need to eat," T said in his rough, flat voice. "There is hot coffee in the silver pot for you." Leo and Mia didn't wait for permission. They wiggled out of Zuri's arms and climbed down from the tall bed. They ran over to the table, their oversized t-shirts dragging on the floor behind them. They stared at the food with wide, hungry eyes. Mia grabbed a strawberry and shoved the whole thing into her mouth. Red juice ran down her chin. "Slow down," Zuri said, hurrying over to them. She pulled them into the chairs and started cutting the pancakes into tiny pieces for them. She didn't touch the food herself. She felt too sick with worry to eat. She just poured a cup of the black coffee and held the warm mug in her freezing hands. T stood by the door, watching them with his arms crossed over his chest. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes. "Where is he?" Zuri asked softly. She didn't say Yeonseok's name. It felt too dangerous to say it out loud. "Downstairs," T answered, "waiting." Zuri swallowed hard. She watched her babies eat. They were stuffing handfuls of bacon and eggs into their mouths like they had never seen food before. It was humiliating and relieving at the same time. At least they were eating. At least they were warm. Suddenly, heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway. T immediately dropped his arms and stood up perfectly straight. He stepped back out into the hall to make room. Yeonseok walked in. He was wearing a crisp white dress shirt and dark slacks. He looked fresh, awake, and completely deadly. The sleeves of his shirt were rolled up to his elbows, showing off the thick, black ink that wrapped around his heavy muscles. His dark hair was slightly wet from a shower. He looked exactly like the man Zuri had fallen in love with 3 years ago, before she found out the money he spent on her came from selling illegal guns and ruining lives. Yeonseok didn't say a word. He closed the door behind him and locked it. Click. He slowly walked over to the table. Zuri stepped back, putting distance between them. She held her coffee mug so tight her knuckles turned white. Yeonseok ignored her completely. He pulled out a 3rd chair and sat down right next to the twins. He rested his elbows on his knees and just stared at them. Leo stopped chewing. He looked at the scary man sitting next to him. The boy had syrup all over his cheeks and a piece of bacon gripped in his tiny fist. He didn't cry. He just stared right back at Yeonseok with the exact same dark, heavy eyes. "They have no manners," Yeonseok said softly, his voice a low rumble. "They eat like wild animals." "They are hungry," Zuri snapped. She couldn't stop herself. Anger flashed hot in her chest. "Don't talk about them like that." Yeonseok slowly turned his head to look at her. His black eyes were completely empty of any warmth. "They eat like this because you starved them. Because you decided that living in a box in the rain was better than living in my house." He reached across the table and picked up a clean white napkin. Very slowly, he leaned toward Leo. Zuri tensed, ready to throw her hot coffee in his face and fight him, but Yeonseok just gently wiped the sticky syrup off his son's cheek. Leo didn't pull away. He let the scary man clean his face, then went right back to chewing his bacon. Yeonseok stared at his hand. He looked at the sticky syrup on the napkin. For a split second, something completely broken flashed across his hard face. He had missed everything. Their first steps, their first words. He didn't even know what his own kids liked to do. He tossed the dirty napkin onto the tray and leaned back in his chair. "Finish your food," he told the kids. Then he looked at Zuri. "Sit down." Zuri shook her head. "I don't want to sit." Yeonseok sighed. It was a heavy, exhausted sound. He suddenly reached out, grabbed her wrist, and yanked her down into the chair across from him. He moved so fast she didn't even have time to scream. The hot coffee splashed over the edge of her mug and burned her knuckles. She gasped in pain, but he didn't let go of her wrist. His large fingers wrapped completely around her arm, holding her trapped. I am not playing games with you today, Zuri, he said. His voice was cold and hard like stone. I lost millions of dollars. I lost 2 years of my life hiding in a dusty desert while the feds tore my city apart. I lost my brother because he took a bullet trying to protect one of our warehouses that you told the cops about. You have a lot of blood on your hands. Zuri stared at him. She felt sick. She knew about his brother. It was on the news. I didn't tell them to shoot anyone, she whispered. Her voice shook. I just told them where the shipments were. I wanted to stop you from hurting people. You were out of control, Yeonseok. You were going to kill that family at the docks over a tiny debt. I couldn't let you. So you destroyed everything I built, he sneered, leaning closer to her face. He smelled like mint and danger. And you took my children away. They weren't your children then, she argued, tears pooling in her eyes. They weren't born. I was trying to protect them from becoming exactly like you. Yeonseok's jaw locked. The muscles in his face jumped. His grip on her wrist tightened until it hurt. She let out a small whimper, trying to pull her arm back, but it was like pulling against a steel trap. Who helped you? He demanded. Zuri froze, the air left her lungs. What? A pregnant woman doesn't vanish into thin air without a trace, he said, staring deep into her eyes, looking for any sign of a lie. My men looked everywhere. I paid hackers. I paid dirty cops. I paid everyone in the city and nobody could find you. Somebody wiped your identity. Somebody gave you fake papers. Who? Zuri shook her head fast. Nobody. I did it myself. I ran. Bullshit, he growled. He leaned so close his nose almost touched hers. You were 22 years old and crying every time I raised my voice. You didn't know how to wipe a government database. Give me a name, Zuri, right now. Zuri's mind raced. If she gave him the name of the one detective who took pity on her and helped her escape, Yeonseok would find him and kill him. The man had a wife and kids. She couldn't do it. It was nobody, she lied, her voice shaking violently. I swear, I just took a bus and hid. Yeonseok let go of her wrist. Zuri let out a breath of relief, but it only lasted a second. He stood up from his chair. The sudden movement scared Mia, and the little girl dropped her pancake and started to cry. Zuri quickly reached over and rubbed her daughter's back, trying to quiet her down. You think I'm stupid, Yeonseok said, looking down at her. You think you can sit in my house, eating my food, and lie to my face. I'm not lying, she cried, hugging Mia tight. Fine, he said. He walked over to the large window and looked out at the thick fog. He shoved his hands deep into his pockets. You don't want to tell me? I will find out anyway. But since you want to play tough, we will do this my way. He turned back to face her. The look in his eyes made Zuri's blood run cold. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was total control. You belong to me, he said, his voice ringing loud in the quiet room. You are not leaving this property. You will raise these children here where I can see them. They will eat the best food. They will wear the best clothes. And they will learn to be exactly what you fear. They will be my heirs. Zuri gasped. No, you can't do that. You can't force them into this life. Watch me, he shot back. And if you ever try to run away with them again, I won't just lock you in a room. I will lock you in a basement without windows, and I will tell them their mother is dead. Do you understand me? Zuri stared at him. Tears spilled over her eyelashes and rolled down her cheeks. He meant every word. He wasn't the man she loved anymore. He was a monster who had been completely broken, and now he was going to break her to fix himself. You are a monster, she whispered, her voice full of pure hate. Yeonseok walked back to the table. He leaned down until he was eye level with her. He didn't look angry, he just looked hollow. You made me this way, he whispered back. He stood up tall, straightened his crisp shirt, and looked at the twins one last time. T will bring up more clothes for you later. Get them dressed. We have a doctor coming at noon to check their health. If they are sick because of you, Zuri, you will regret it. He turned around, walked to the door, unlocked it, and stepped out into the hallway. The door shut with a heavy slam, and the lock clicked into place again. Zuri sat at the table, holding her crying daughter, while her son kept eating his cold bacon. She was drowning, and the only man who could save her was the one holding her head under the water. The heavy wooden door clicked shut, and Zuri was left in the crushing silence of the giant bedroom. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding and pressed the palms of her hands against her eyes. She wanted to scream. She wanted to throw the hot coffee at the wall and tear the expensive sheets off the bed. But she couldn't. Her babies were sitting right there, watching her with wide, confused eyes. "Mama," Mia asked softly. She had a piece of bacon halfway to her mouth, but she had stopped chewing. "Bad man." Zuri forced a smile onto her face. It felt tight and completely fake, but she had to be strong for them. She walked back to the table and sat down, pulling Mia's chair closer to hers. "No, sweetie, not a bad man, just an angry man. Eat your food. You need a full tummy." She watched them finish the huge plate of eggs and pancakes. Once they were full, their eyes started drooping again. The warm room and the heavy meal made them sleepy. Zuri tucked them back into the massive bed and watched them fall asleep. As soon as their breathing leveled out, she went to work. She walked over to the huge window looking out over the backyard. She pressed her hands against the glass. It was freezing cold, but it didn't rattle. She pushed harder. Nothing. She looked closely at the edges of the frame. There were thick metal bolts drilled straight into the heavy wood. The window was permanently sealed shut. It was bulletproof glass. Even if she threw a chair at it, it would not break. Yeonseok had put her in a beautiful, warm cage. She paced the length of the room, back and forth. She counted her steps, 20 steps across, 20 steps back. She chewed on her fingernails until they bled. She thought about the detective who helped her run away 3 years ago, Detective Miller. He had warned her that a man like Gu Yeonseok never stopped looking. He had told her to never use her real name, to never apply for a credit card, and to always pay in cash. She had followed every single rule. She lived like a ghost. But it wasn't enough. The devil always got his due. Hours dragged on. The thick fog outside the window didn't lift. It just swirled around the dark pine trees like smoke. Zuri sat on the edge of the bed, jumping at every little sound the old house made. Right at noon, heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway. Not just one person, several. Zuri stood up immediately. She put her back against the bed, shielding the sleeping twins. The lock clicked and the door swung open. T walked in first. He stepped to the side, making room for a short, older Korean man carrying a worn-out black leather bag. The man wore round glasses and a neat gray sweater. Behind the older man, Yeonseok entered the room. He looked just as cold and angry as he had that morning. "Wake them up," Yeonseok ordered, nodding his head toward the bed. "They are sleeping," Zuri argued, keeping her voice low. "They have been exhausted for days. Let them rest." Yeonseok didn't argue back. He just stepped forward, grabbed her arm, and pulled her hard out of the way. Zuri stumbled, barely catching her balance before she hit the floor. "Hey," she yelled, rubbing her arm. "I am not asking you, Zuri," he said, turning to look at her with dead eyes. "This is Dr. Park. He is going to examine my children. Wake them up, or I will let T do it." Zuri swallowed her anger. She knew she couldn't win a physical fight with him. She hurried over to the bed and gently rubbed Leo's back. "Leo, baby, wake up. A doctor is here to look at you." Leo whined and rolled over, rubbing his eyes. Mia woke up right after him, sitting up and looking at the strange men in the room. She immediately started to cry and reached her arms out for Zuri. Zuri picked her up and held her tight. Dr. Park walked over to the bed. He set his black bag down on the mattress and opened it. He didn't look at Zuri, he only looked at Yeonseok. "Which one first, boss?" "The boy," Yeonseok said. He stood at the foot of the bed, his arms crossed over his broad chest. He watched every single move the doctor made. Dr. Park gently pulled Leo's oversized t-shirt up to check his heartbeat with a cold, silver stethoscope. Leo flinched and tried to pull away. "Hold him still," Dr. Park told Zuri. Zuri sat on the edge of the bed and held Leo's little hands, whispering soft words to keep him calm. The doctor listened to his chest, looked into his ears with a bright light, and pressed his fingers against Leo's neck and stomach. He did the exact same thing to Mia. The little girl cried the entire time, burying her face into Zuri's neck. Yeonseok watched in total silence, his jaw ticked. He hated the sound of them crying. He hated that they were scared of everything. After 10 minutes, Dr. Park packed his tools back into his bag. He pushed his round glasses up his nose and turned to face Yeonseok. "Well," Yeonseok asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. "They are breathing fine and their hearts are strong," Dr. Park said slowly, choosing his words very carefully. "But they are very small for their age. They are too skinny. The boy's ribs are showing more than they should. They are suffering from severe vitamin deficiency. They simply have not been eating enough solid, healthy food. Their immune systems are weak. If they catch a bad cold right now, it could turn into something much worse very quickly. The silence in the room became thick and heavy. Zuri squeezed her eyes shut. The guilt hit her so hard she felt sick to her stomach. She knew they were skinny. She knew they were hungry. Hearing it out loud from a doctor made her feel like the worst mother in the world. Yeonseok stared at the doctor for a long time. Then, he slowly turned his head to look at Zuri. The pure hatred in his dark eyes made her blood freeze. "Is that all?" Yeonseok asked the doctor, never taking his eyes off Zuri. "They need a strict diet," Dr. Park continued. "Red meat, fresh vegetables, lots of dairy, and they need warm clothes. Their core temperatures are slightly low. I will leave some liquid vitamins with tea downstairs. They need it twice a day." "Thank you, doctor," Yeonseok said softly. "Tea will show you out." Tea nodded and opened the door. The doctor hurried out of the room, looking relieved to escape the heavy, violent tension in the air. Tea followed him and pulled the door shut, but he didn't lock it this time. Yeonseok slowly uncrossed his arms. He took a slow step toward the bed. Zuri immediately pushed the twins behind her back, her heart hammering against her ribs. "You protected them," Yeonseok whispered. His voice was full of poison. "You ran away to give them a better life, and you starved them to the bone." "I tried," Zuri yelled, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. "I worked double shifts at a diner. I scrubbed floors, but the rent was too high and they kept getting sick because the heat in our apartment broke. I did everything I could." "You did nothing," he roared, suddenly slamming his heavy fist down on the bedside table. The wood cracked loudly. The twins screamed in terror. Zuri jumped, throwing her arms back to cover her kids. Yeonseok leaned over her, his face inches from hers. He smelled like anger and dark coffee. "You had a home," he yelled right into her face. "You had a man who would have burned the city to the ground to keep you warm. You had millions of dollars at your fingertips. But you chose to play the victim. You chose to run, and you made my children suffer for your stupid, selfish pride." "You are a criminal," she screamed back, not backing down even though she was terrified. "You kill people. I didn't want my kids raised by a murderer." Yeonseok reached out and grabbed a fistful of her dark hair. He pulled her head back so she had to look straight up at him. The pain made her gasp, but she didn't close her eyes. "I am a monster," he agreed softly, his breath hot against her skin. "I do bad things to bad people, but I take care of what is mine. I would never let my blood freeze in a cardboard box. Never." He let go of her hair and shoved her back against the pillows. He stood up straight and smoothed out the front of his shirt. He looked completely disgusted. "Get them dressed," he ordered, his voice suddenly cold and dead again. T left bags of clothes in the hallway. "Put them in something warm. And put something decent on yourself. When you are done, come downstairs to my office. We are going to establish the rules of your new life." He turned around and walked out of the room, slamming the door hard behind him. Zuri lay on the bed for a long minute, pulling Leo and Mia into her arms. She cried into their hair. She was broken. Yeonseok was right. She had tried to save them, but she had only made them suffer. Now, she was completely trapped, and he had all the power. A few minutes later, she wiped her face and stood up. She walked to the door and pulled it open. 3 large shopping bags from an expensive children's store sat on the hallway floor. Next to them was a sleek black box from a high-end women's boutique. She dragged all the bags into the room. The clothes for the twins were perfect. Thick, soft wool sweaters, warm jeans, thick socks, and sturdy little boots. She dressed them quickly. They looked like different kids. They looked warm. They looked rich. She opened the black box for herself. Inside was a dark green silk blouse and a pair of tailored black trousers. Under the clothes was a set of expensive matching underwear. Her cheeks burned hot. He had ordered someone to buy her underwear. It was a sick reminder that he controlled every single part of her life now. She took a quick shower, scrubbed the smell of cheap soap off her skin, and put on the expensive clothes. The silk felt like water against her skin. It fit her perfectly. He remembered her exact size. That thought scared her more than anything else. She brushed out her dark hair and let it hang down her back. She took a deep breath, grabbed the twins by their small hands, and walked out of the bedroom. The house was completely silent. She walked down the wide, winding wooden staircase. Every step creaked slightly under her feet. When she reached the bottom floor, she saw two large men in dark suits standing by the heavy front door. They had guns holstered openly on their belts. They stared at her, but they didn't speak. "This way," a voice said. Zuri turned and saw T standing at the end of a long hallway. He pointed to a set of double oak doors that were slightly open. Zuri held her baby's hands tighter and walked down the hall. Her legs felt heavy. She pushed the oak doors open and walked inside. The office was huge. The walls were lined with tall bookshelves filled with old books. A massive stone fireplace took up one whole wall, and a real fire was burning hot, making the room warm and smelling like cedar wood. In the middle of the room sat a massive, dark mahogany desk. Yeonseok sat behind the desk in a high-backed leather chair. He was reading a file, a heavy crystal glass of whiskey sitting next to his hand. He didn't look up when she walked in. "Sit," he commanded, flipping a page in the file. Zuri walked over to the two leather chairs sitting in front of his desk. She lifted Leo and Mia into one chair, letting them sit together. She sat in the other chair. She kept her back perfectly straight. Yeonseok finally closed the file. He tossed it onto the desk and leaned back in his chair. He looked at her. His dark eyes dragged slowly up her body, taking in the dark green silk blouse and the black trousers. His gaze was heavy, burning hot against her skin. It wasn't the look of a man who hated her. It was the look of a man who was starving, and she was the only meal in the room. "You look better," he said softly. "I look like a doll you dressed up," she shot back. He smirked. It was a dark, dangerous smile. "You are not a doll, Zuri. A doll cannot lie to the federal police and steal millions of dollars from a cartel." He sat up straight and folded his hands on the desk. The games were over. "These are the rules," he said, his voice hard and clear. "You will live in this house. You will not leave the property. You will not use a phone. You will not access the internet. If you need anything for the children, you tell T and he will buy it." Zuri felt her throat close up. "I am a prisoner." "You are a mother," he corrected her. "Your only job now is to make sure those kids get healthy. A private tutor will come next week to start teaching them. A private chef is moving in tomorrow to cook their meals." "And what about me?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What happens to me?" Yeonseok stood up slowly. He walked around the large desk until he was standing right in front of her chair. He leaned back against his desk, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked down at her, his eyes dark and heavy. "You," he whispered, "are going to pay for what you did, but not with blood." He reached out and traced his finger lightly down her jawline. Zuri flinched, but she didn't pull away. She was too scared to move. His touch was burning hot, a violent mix of deep hatred and twisted desire. "You burned my world down, Zuri," he said, his voice dropping to a rough growl. "So you are going to help me rebuild it. You are going to stand by my side. You are going to smile at my dinners. You are going to play the perfect, loyal woman, and every single night when the doors are locked." He leaned down until his lips brushed against her ear. She shivered violently as his hot breath hit her neck. "You are going to remember who you belong to." Zuri jerked away from him. Her heart was beating so fast she thought it might break her ribs. She grabbed Leo and Mia by their hands and pulled them off the large leather chair. She didn't say a word. She couldn't. Her throat felt completely tight. She turned her back on Yeonseok and practically ran out of the heavy oak doors, dragging her confused toddlers down the long hallway. She could feel his dark eyes burning into her back the entire way. The rest of the week felt like walking through thick mud. Zuri quickly learned that Yeonseok did not make empty threats. His word was the absolute law inside the massive stone house. By Tuesday morning, a private chef arrived. He was a quiet, older man who never looked Zuri in the eye. He filled the giant kitchen with expensive groceries and started cooking massive, hot meals 3 times a day. He made thick cuts of steak, creamy mashed potatoes, fresh vegetables dripping in butter, and sweet fruit tarts. Zuri watched her children eat. For the first 2 days, Leo and Mia ate so fast they made themselves sick. They were terrified the food would disappear. But by Thursday, they started to realize the food was always going to be there. Their hollow cheeks started to fill out. The dark circles under their eyes faded away. They stopped shivering. They ran around the huge guest bedroom, playing with the mountain of expensive toys T had brought back from the city. They were laughing. They were happy. It made Zuri feel sick to her stomach. She sat on the edge of the large bed, watching Leo crash a shiny red toy truck into a pile of wooden blocks. She had tried so hard to be a good mother. She broke her back scrubbing floors and washing dishes just to buy them a single loaf of bread. And Yeonseok fixed all their problems with a snap of his fingers. He bought their health. He bought their happiness. It was a brutal, heavy reminder that she had failed them and he had won. She spent most of her days trapped in the bedroom. She only left to walk down the hallway to get the heavy silver food trays the chef left on a small table near the stairs. She saw the armed guards standing by the front door down below. She saw T walking the halls, always checking the locks, always watching her. She didn't see Yeonseok. He left the house early every morning in a line of black SUVs and didn't come back until late at night. The sound of his heavy car tires crushing the gravel driveway sent a spike of pure fear through Zuri's chest every single night. Friday night brought the heavy, freezing rain back to Mercer Island. The wind howled against the thick bulletproof glass of the bedroom window. Zuri had just put the twins to sleep. She was wearing the dark green silk blouse and black pants, sitting in the corner chair, staring blankly at the wall. A sharp knock on the door made her jump. She stood up slowly and walked over. She unlocked it and pulled it open just a few inches. T stood in the hallway. He was wearing his usual dark suit, his face completely blank. "The boss is home," T said in his rough voice. "He wants you downstairs in the formal dining room in 5 minutes." Zuri felt her hands start to shake. "The kids are sleeping. I can't leave them alone." "I will stand right outside this door," T answered. "Nobody will go in, nobody will touch them, but you need to go downstairs, Zuri. Do not make him wait. He had a very bad day in the city and he is not in a good mood." Zuri swallowed hard. She nodded, closed the door, and took a deep breath. She looked in the large mirror above the dresser. She looked pale. She looked scared. She hated it. She pinched her cheeks to bring some color into them, pushed her shoulders back, and walked out of the room. T kept his word. He stepped right in front of the bedroom door and crossed his arms, standing guard over the sleeping twins. The formal dining room was at the very back of the house. Zuri walked slowly down the quiet hallway. The lights were dimmed low. She reached the large arched doorway and stopped. The dining table was made of dark, heavy wood. It was long enough to seat 20 people, but there were only 2 chairs set up, one at the head of the table and one right next to it. A massive crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, casting sharp shadows across the room. Yeonseok sat at the head of the table. He had taken off his suit jacket and his tie. His white shirt was unbuttoned at the top, showing the dark ink of his tattoos crawling up his collarbone. He was staring down at a crystal glass of dark whiskey in his hand. He looked exhausted. There was a dark bruise forming on his left cheekbone, and his knuckles were split and bleeding. Zuri stood in the doorway, her eyes locked on the dried blood on his hands. He had hurt someone today. Maybe he had killed someone. The brutal reality of his world came crashing right back into her face. "Sit down," he said. He didn't look up. He just took a slow sip of his drink. Zuri walked over to the chair next to his. She pulled it out carefully, trying not to make a sound on the hardwood floor, and sat down. The table was covered in plates of hot food. Roast chicken, fresh bread, roasted potatoes, but neither of them reached for it. The silence stretched out. The only sound was the heavy rain beating against the large windows and the fire crackling in the massive stone fireplace behind them. "Did you eat today?" Yeonseok finally asked, staring at the amber liquid in his glass. "Yes," Zuri answered shortly. "Did the kids eat?" "Yes, they ate a lot." Yeonseok slowly turned his head to look at her. His dark eyes were cold and empty. He looked at the fear hiding in her face. He looked at the way she kept her hands folded tightly in her lap. "You look at me like I am the devil," he said softly. "You are," she whispered back. The words slipped out before she could stop them. She braced herself for him to yell or hit the table, but he didn't. He just let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Maybe I am," he agreed, setting his heavy glass down. "The city thinks I am, the police think I am, and you made damn sure my children will think I am too." "I didn't tell them anything about you," Zuri defended herself, her voice rising just a little bit. "They don't even know who you are." That is exactly the fucking problem, Yeonseok snapped, his voice suddenly hard and sharp like a whip. They don't know me, they look at me and they see a stranger. My own son flinches when I walk into the room, because of you. Because you act like a monster, Zuri yelled back, her fear finally giving way to anger. She leaned forward, gripping the edge of the heavy table. Look at your hands, Yeonseok. You have someone else's blood on your knuckles. You want me to tell my 2-year-old babies that their daddy went out to work today and beat a man half to death? You want them to hug you while you smell like blood and gunpowder. Yeonseok's jaw locked. The muscles in his neck strained against his skin. He stood up from his chair, so fast it tipped over backwards and hit the floor with a loud, violent crash. Zuri gasped and pushed her chair back, trying to get away from him, but he was too fast. He stepped around the corner of the table, grabbed her by the upper arms, and hauled her up to her feet. He slammed her back against the dark wood paneling of the wall. Don't you ever judge how I feed this family, he roared right into her face. I bleed so you don't have to. I hurt people so nobody ever dares to hurt what belongs to me. You lived in my house for a year before you called the cops. You spent my money. You wore the diamonds I bought you. You loved the monster when he was keeping you warm at night. I didn't know, she cried, tears spilling over her eyelashes. She pushed her hands against his hard chest, trying to force him back, but he didn't move an inch. He was like a wall of solid stone. I thought you ran a shipping company. I didn't know about the guns. I didn't know you ordered people to be killed. You found out and you ran, he growled, leaning his face so close his nose brushed against hers. He breathed in her scent. Even angry and terrified, she smelled like sweet vanilla. It drove him absolutely crazy. You didn't ask me for the truth. You just wore a wire, talked to the feds, and left me to burn. You took my kids and put them in a cardboard box on the street. I protected them, she sobbed, the tears running hot down her cheeks. I did what I had to do. Yeonseok stared down at her wet face. His chest heaved up and down as he fought for air. The anger inside him was a wild, burning fire, but the feeling of her small body pinned against his, the soft skin of her arms under his rough, bruised hands, it twisted the anger into something completely different, something dangerous. You protected them, he whispered. His voice dropped to a low, rough rumble. He let go of her arms and moved his large hands up to cup her face. His thumbs wiped the hot tears off her cheeks. The touch was surprisingly gentle, a complete contrast to the violence in his eyes. Zuri froze, her breath hitched in her throat. She stared up into his dark eyes, totally trapped. She could smell the expensive whiskey on his breath. She could feel the wild heat radiating off his body. And who is going to protect you, Zuri? He asked softly. His thumb traced her bottom lip. You are completely alone in this house. You have no friends, no family. You only have me. Don't do this, she pleaded, her voice breaking into a tiny whisper. Please, Yeonseok, let me go. I will never let you go, he stated. It wasn't a threat. It was an absolute fact. You are going to stay in this house until the day you die. You are going to raise my heirs. You are going to sit at my table. And you are going to share my bed. Zuri's eyes went wide. She shook her head desperately. No, I won't. I hate you. I will fight you every single night. Yeonseok smirked. It was a dark, terrifying smile that showed his straight white teeth. He stepped even closer, pressing his entire body against hers, trapping her completely against the wall. Then fight me, he challenged her softly. He leaned down, his lips hovering barely a millimeter above hers. Fight me, Zuri, but we both know how this ends. You can lie to the cops. You can lie to yourself, but you can't lie to me. Before she could turn her head away, he closed the distance and kissed her. It wasn't soft. It wasn't sweet. It was a violent collision of anger, betrayal, and 3 years of total starvation. His mouth crashed down on hers, demanding completely. One of his large hands slid to the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her dark hair, holding her in place so she couldn't escape. His other hand gripped her waist, his thumb pressing hard into her side through the thin silk of her green blouse. Zuri squeezed her eyes shut. She raised her fists and hit his chest, trying to push him off. But the moment his tongue slid past her lips, tasting like expensive whiskey and raw heat, a terrifying, familiar spark ignited in her blood. Her body betrayed her. For 3 years, she had survived on cold rain and fear. Now, she was wrapped in total, absolute fire. She let out a soft, broken sound against his mouth. Her fists slowly stopped hitting him. Her fingers uncurled and grabbed the fabric of his white shirt, holding on tightly as her knees went weak. Yeonseok felt her surrender. A low groan vibrated deep in his chest. He pulled her flush against his heavy muscles, kissing her deeper, harder, punishing her for leaving and claiming her all over again at the exact same time. He bit her bottom lip hard enough to make her gasp, then immediately smoothed his tongue over the sting. He finally broke the kiss, pulling his face back just an inch. Both of them were breathing hard, chests heaving. Zuri's lips were swollen and red. Her eyes were hazy, completely lost in the heavy fog of the twisted desire he pulled out of her. Yeonseok looked at her, his dark eyes burning with total victory. He had her. No matter how much she hated him, she was still completely his. "You see," he whispered against her mouth, "you hate what I do, but you don't hate me." Zuri stared at him. The painful truth of his words hit her like a punch to the stomach. She hated the criminal, but her stupid, broken heart still wanted the man. He stepped back slowly, putting distance between them. The cold air rushed in to replace his body heat, and Zuri instantly shivered. Yeonseok smoothed his messy hair back and turned toward the table. He picked up his fallen chair, set it right, and sat back down. He picked up his crystal glass and took another slow sip. "Sit down, Zuri," he commanded. His voice was perfectly calm again. "Eat your dinner, you need your strength." Zuri's legs shook violently. She wanted to run upstairs and scrub her lips until they bled, but she knew it wouldn't change anything. She slowly walked back to her chair and sat down. She stared at the plate of expensive roast chicken, feeling completely empty. The golden cage was locked tight, and he had thrown away the key.